Anyway, thank you all very much for being here today. Welcome to Etobicoke Lakeshore. On behalf of my provincial counterpart, Christine Hogarth, and I, we're very pleased to see some members of our caucuses and friends from the media and friends from the community here today. So thank you for coming. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are standing on the traditional territory of many First Nations and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis people. I also want to thank Lily Liu from the Learning Garden Childcare for hosting us this morning. I have to tell you, this is a little bit personal for me because not only is it my riding, but I actually know somebody who attended here growing up. So I can speak firsthand about what a positive environment it is and what a great facility it is. I want to remind everybody too, especially my colleagues who are coming up to the podium and everybody's here, feel free to use the hand sanitizer, make sure you're wearing your mask, and make sure you're following all of the safety protocols available. So, look, today we're here to talk about improving the lives of families across Ontario. For Canadians and for Ontarians, high quality early learning and childcare is not a luxury, it's an absolute necessity. And that's why today's announcement is so important. And that's why the Government of Ontario and the Government of Canada have been working together. And I want to pause for a second and just reflect on that for a moment if I can. What you've seen during this pandemic, time after time, day in and day out, is all levels of government working together. Doesn't matter whether you're a member of the provincial government, the federal government, the municipal government, whether you're a Liberal or you're a Conservative. People have put their swords down and we've worked together to make sure we're doing the right thing and helping Ontarians and Canadians get through this pandemic. And today's another example of that, and I want to thank all of my colleagues provincially and federally who are here today. So I want to introduce my colleague, Minister Ahmed Hussen, who's the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. I've had the privilege of working with the Minister since 2015 when we were both elected. He was appointed Minister of Immigration and Refugees in 2017. He was appointed to his current portfolio in 2019. I've worked with him side by side. I've seen him up close. I've seen how dedicated he is. I've seen how hard he works. And it really is an honor for me to work alongside him. And I want to introduce him, call him up, and just say thank you for being here in Etobicoke Lakeshore. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to everybody here. So, Minister, please join us at the podium.
Thank you so much, James. It's a pleasure to be back in Etobicoke Lakeshore, and it's an honor to serve with you. James, in addition to being the Member of Parliament for Etobicoke Lakeshore, is also our chair of the Liberal 416 caucus, representing the voices of the Toronto community area. So it is a pleasure to be with you all. I hope everyone is well. And I'd like to thank once again MP Maloney and the Honourable Stephen Lecce, Minister of Education for Ontario, for being here. Minister Lecce and I have been working hard to ensure that Ontario families have access to affordable, quality and accessible early learning and childcare. Le ministre Lecce et moi avons travaillé d'arrache-pied pour faire en sorte que les familles ontariennes aient accès à des services d'apprentissage et de garde de jeunes enfants abordables et de qualité. We both want to ensure that every child gets the best possible start in life. We both want to make sure that as families emerge from this unprecedented and extraordinary pandemic, that they're well equipped to recover from this pandemic and re-enter the workforce. Canadian families are still struggling, as you know, with the impacts and the negative impacts and the dislocation of the COVID-19 pandemic. Parents are worried about returning back to work and about sending their kids back to school and to daycare. I am a father of 3 young boys, and this is a conversation that is occurring in my households as it is occurring in many, many households in Ontario. So first and foremost, I want to reassure Canadians and Ontarians in particular that our priority remains the health and well-being of everyone. And so in that regard, we are very much focused on the safe restart and reopening of our economy and our society, and making sure that Canada remains more resilient to any future possible waves of this virus. So particularly in these times, families in need have to have access to safe, affordable, quality and accessible childcare as we slowly and safely reopen our economy. This is, as James Maloney said, this is more than a convenience, this is more than a luxury, this is a necessity. That is why our government, the federal government, entered into bilateral agreements with provinces and territories in early learning and childcare in 2017 to provide them with over $1.2 billion over 3 years for early learning and childcare programs. This started in 2017 and 2018 and will provide an additional $400 million in 2020-2021. And that is why I'm really happy to be here to announce that as part of this $400 million investment nationally, more than $147 million will be provided to the province of Ontario this year to invest in early learning and childcare. This is in addition to the $234 million that is the share of Ontario's federal dollars for early learning and childcare as part of the Safe Restart Agreement. This means collectively that new licensed childcare spaces will become available, that more Ontario families will benefit from subsidized childcare spaces and childcare subsidies in general. It will also help offset the costs associated with the COVID-19 pandemic in this sector. As you know, the early learning and childcare sector across the country has been heavily impacted by this pandemic. And they have had to obtain, of course, personal protective equipment. They've had to obtain cleaning supplies and invest a little bit more in other necessities. And so this will offset, these extra additional dollars will offset the associated costs with COVID-19 closures and reopenings in Ontario for childcare centres. As I said, this money that I'm announcing today is on top of the $625 million that the federal government is providing to provinces and territories to address the reduced availability of childcare and the unique needs stemming from the pandemic across Canada with the Safe Restart Agreement. Again, Ontario's share of that federal money was $234 million. So this year, collectively, the Government of Canada will invest almost $1.2 billion in total early learning and childcare in Canada. And almost $400 million of that money will be invested right here in Ontario. That is a record amount of money that the federal government is providing to Ontario for early learning and childcare. So I want to assure Ontarians that the Government of Canada is looking forward to continuing to work with the Government of Ontario to ensure that Ontario families continue to have access to safe, affordable, quality and accessible childcare. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister. I was listening closely. I don't know if you noticed over there, but Christine and I were chatting, and we missed the part where he said most of that money's staying here in Etobicoke Lakeshore. Perhaps our next speaker can clarify that and shed some light on that for us. No pressure, but our next speaker is Minister Stephen Lecce, who's our Provincial Minister of Education. He really needs no introduction. For the past 6 months, Minister Lecce can be seen almost daily on television dealing with some of the more challenging issues that we're facing, not just during the pandemic, but on an ongoing basis. And he's been working with Minister Hussen and the federal government and has been a good partner, as I said. So, Minister, perhaps you can join us at the podium and clarify that little discrepancy for us.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, James. It's good to be here in Etobicoke. Minister Hussen, it's good to be joined with you. And of course, to my parliamentary colleague, Christine Hogarth, who's been a unabashed defender of parents and accessible, affordable childcare. It's amazing to be with you. And I also want to thank Lily. I want to thank the ECs, the entire staff here at the Loading Garden Childcare Center. I also want to say it's amazing to see children being children. It's nice to see their smiles. I was talking to young Oliver a bit earlier today when we were playing, and he said it's nice to be back. And so that, I think, energy, that optimism, that innocence, I think, is something that we could all rally behind as our kids in the province, the overwhelming amount, return to school. And so in March, we made a commitment to Ontario parents to ensure that our kids remain safe, to ensure that parents can return to work with confidence. And we did that by allowing the childcare sector to reopen in mid-June with enhanced health and safety protocols. As childcare providers continue to safely reopen childcare centres right across our province, I want to assure you and all parents that we are continuing to prioritize the health and safety of our children and our childcare staff. We know how critical childcare is to ensure that all working moms and dads in this province are able to return to work safely. And make no mistake, when it comes to your child and to their safety, we will do whatever it takes. We also know that hardworking childcare workers go above and beyond for our children. It's so obvious that the ECs and our childcare educators are so committed to the learning and the safety of all children. It's why we support the childcare sector from the start with funding, enhanced guidelines, and providing PPE to our workers. It's why we'll continue to follow the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health and the COVID-19 command table to ensure the health and safety of children and of staff are never compromised as childcare centres open right across Ontario. And if at any time the health and safety of children and staff may be jeopardized, we will take swift action, decisive action to ensure their safety by following the advice of public health. And this has been the Premier and I's commitment to you. But we know how important childcare is to parents. And that is why we'll continue to invest more in childcare to ensure it is safe, it is accessible and affordable for every parent in rural and urban parts of this province. We want to make sure that parents and families feel supported and that access to high-quality early years programming can be achieved. We know how much can be achieved when we all work together, when we put all those party stripes together, as James mentioned earlier. And I want to just build on that point. You know, I'm very proud that in our country, we really have been an example to the world of putting the interests of the public, of the health and safety of our citizens first. And I think the leadership demonstrated by the Premier of our province in close relationship with the Prime Minister and other leaders at municipal levels demonstrate that we are totally focused on overcoming the challenge, on getting our economy back on track, on supporting the health and safety of our kids, and allowing parents to return to work as changes occur within the province and country. And I want to thank Minister Hussen for being a consistent supporter in working with Ontario to achieve that end. Through our extension of the Early Learning and Childcare Agreement, as we are announcing today, Ontario will receive an investment of $147 million for childcare. It will help support ongoing health and safety needs, including enhanced cleaning and PPE for our staff. This investment will also continue to support important initiatives such as increasing access to early years and childcare services for families and supporting professional learning opportunities for our staff. It will help sustain, it will stabilize the childcare sector as it remains open to full capacity. This builds on the initial 3-year Canada-Ontario agreement, early childcare agreement, that demonstrates our shared commitment to supporting Ontario families. We all have a responsibility to support the children, to ensure that our children reach their full potential. We are confident in this plan to enable parents to return to work while having the peace of mind that their kids are safe. And with that, I thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. I think you can't stress enough the importance of the significance of this announcement, and I really genuinely want to thank you and Minister Hussen for being here today, because the health and well-being of our young people is of vital importance. And nobody knows that better than our next speaker, who's Lily Liu, who's the Executive Director of this Learning Garden Childcare. And as I said, I do have first-hand experience. My friend and colleague Mary Kennedy over here, you can tell her daughter Sarah, who's now in university, is a beneficiary of the good work you do here. So we know all of the children that are behind us today have a bright future, thanks to all of the good work you do. So please join us.
Thank you, Minister Hussen and Minister Lecce, for this very exciting announcement regarding childcare. On behalf of Learning Garden Childcare, we appreciate the government's support and funding that can enable us to continue to provide safe, quality, and affordable childcare for all of our families. We are very honored that we were able to host you here today, and I know the children had a great time playing with the ministers earlier. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all. Ms. Liu, ministers, Christine, we're all very grateful for today's announcement, for all of you being here. So I'd like to open it up now to questions from the media. And who wants to go first? Okay, over here. Mr. Hussen.
Yeah.
Thanks, Minister. I'm just curious about the Liberal strategy for prioritizing kind of recovery spending. Obviously, there's a lot of different areas where people are hurting, especially in marginalized communities, the homeless. It seems like there's going to needs to be a lot of spending. So what is the strategy that the federal government is looking at when deciding where and when to spend money?
I think we've always prioritized individuals and families and workers, and that has been, if you look at since the pandemic started, our focus has been to make sure that Canadians are able to put a roof over their heads, pay their rent, pay their mortgage, and also put food on the table. So if you look at our extension of the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, the recent announcements with respect to help for businesses, everything is geared towards helping families. The increase to the Canada Child Benefit, the increases we've made to funding in early learning and childcare to help that sector bounce back. It's about enabling folks to deal with the economic shocks of the pandemic and then bounce back and recover stronger. And our efforts are showing early promises. You saw the latest job numbers demonstrated an addition of 419,000 new jobs into the economy. We're not out of the woods yet, but we are on the right track, and we'll continue to have the backs of Canadians and continue to put the supports necessary in place to make sure that people can stay employed and be able to pay for their necessities.
For Minister Lecce, I can. Hi, Minister. Congratulations, by the way, on the centre opening up. It's beautiful. So, Minister, on that note, though, right now, as I just learned from the ministry, only roughly over 3,000 of the 5,500 plus childcare centres are now open in the province. The school, really just around the corner. There could be various reasons as to why it's taking a lag. As you mentioned, it started reopening in June, and in July you announced the cohort changes and everything. So, what do you attribute the fact that great centres like this one are now open, but a massive chunk of the reopening is lagging the school coming up? What's the government's position on why it's taken so long to only get to just over 3,000?
The government is absolutely committed to ensuring that parents in the province have choice and access to childcare. It's why we have carefully, methodically, and following the public health advice, have increased the cohort capacity to make sure we get this right and we keep kids safe. We started with 10, we increased capacity to 15, and now we're restoring pre-COVID capacity within our childcare centres as it was pre-COVID. However, as Lily will know, and as all childcare operators and ECs will know, with very strict health and safety protocols that has allowed Ontario to reopen childcare pretty much through the very beginning of this pandemic, starting with emergency workers, which I think was incredibly important to support our frontline workers in the economy and in our society. With respect to the reopening, over 60% of childcare centres that we're aware of have reopened in the province. We see and expect to see more come online now that September 1 capacity issue is largely negated. I mean, that was, I think, from an economic consideration of operators, it was maybe one of the hindrances. Is it sustainable to open up at a lower quantum of children in schools, in childcare centres? Now that we have that capacity restored, we expect to see more. We've always said childcare operators have to feel comfortable to open when they're ready, just like every other subsect of private enterprise or nonprofits for that matter. They're opening when they are ready. Many elements are taking their time, and we respect that. In the meantime, we're making sure that the sector has funding. Today, by allocating that, or by announcing that $140 million plus of that bilateral agreement by extending it, I think what it signals to the sector for those remaining that haven't opened and for those that have is that we are fully committed to seeing them sustain not through just this pandemic and recession, but well beyond that. Because as was noted, childcare is not a luxury, it is a necessity for working parents, particularly in the context of women economic participation. And we want to see that gap being bridged. So we're going to continue to work with them. In addition to the $2 billion we expend every single year on operating dollars for childcare, we're allocating $1 billion to expand 30,000 childcare spaces over the next 5 years, of which 10,000 of them will be in new schools. We have a childcare tax credit we unveiled up to 75% of eligible expenses. My point is, we take this seriously. We understand how important it is for working parents. We'll continue to be there for the operator. We'll continue to be there for parents to make sure it's affordable and accessible. We'll be there for our kids to make sure it's safe.
So that's just at that 60 mark, as you mentioned. I mean,
Yep.
some classes, September 8th is 5 days away, and then of course the delay this September 15th.
Sure.
So by the 15th, if it's 60 now and the cohorts change, what's now that the cap's been lifted? So what's the government's expectation of what it's going to be by September 15th, and when do you think is the best bet that full pre-pandemic capacity will be?
The decision point to open is largely one based in the market and based by operators, their comfort to reopen. We have given them every incentive to do so. Clear health and safety guidance that's been informed by the best medical science that exists within the country. We have given them operating support at the very beginning to make sure that that differential, as the number of children who are staying within the programs was reducing and the costs were rising for these operators, we gave them a backstop to make sure that they don't close, that they have essentially the difference made up by the province. We've increased operating expenses. We provided PPE, increased cleaning for our childcare centres. And of course, the federal government likewise has also increased investment through the Safe Restart Agreement, $625 million, I believe, federally, of which the province is getting north of $200 million. We've all stepped up. Even municipalities here in Toronto, Mayor Tory and the city have done a lot to make sure it's accessible. So we're doing everything we can from a government perspective to incent our operators to reopen as soon as they can, knowing that at the end of the day, safety has got to be the guiding principle. When they are ready, when they are safe, they will reopen. They have just as much skin in the game as we do for their kids, for their families, for their own economic circumstance. And we're going to continue to demonstrate that we're going to be there. And today's announcement, bilateral extension of an additional year, provides stability for a sector that has faced chaos like so many in the economy. And I'm just hoping it's going to give them that additional incentive to reopen, knowing that, as you said, many parents will be returning to work. Many parents have returned to work, to be fair. September 8th is not some imaginary start date for the labor market. They've already started. Many parents have. But for those that have not, for them and for the rest of our economy, we want to make sure that they're supported with affordable childcare.
I give the mic, of course, to my colleagues, but I didn't quite hear an answer there. So does the government not have an idea of what it's going to be on the 15th and when we'll get back to that pre-pandemic capacity? Because some daycare centers have also permanently closed. So are you saying that we really don't know when we're going to get to 100 and when it'll be at the 15th? Is that fair to say?
What I'm signaling is that childcare operators will make the decision on utilizing a variety of variables, including economics, health and safety, and their own comfort as business leaders. We want them to open up as soon as possible, which is why we provide them with unprecedented provincial funding now, with an agreement extended by an additional year, another in ancillary investment of north of $140 million. That is going to help them open up when they are ready. And that's a commitment they can take to the bank, because at each and every point in this pandemic, we have scaled up our support and ensured that flexibility from the federal government, from their dollars, and even from provincial dollars.
Mr. Hussen?
Given the Ford government's cuts to childcare in 2019, I was just wondering if there are any conditions attached to this agreement, to the extension of it.
The collaboration that we have with the province of Ontario is long-standing in the area of early learning and childcare. I want to add to what the minister said with respect to this renewal of the agreement. In addition to extending it for another year to give certainty to the sector, we are making the federal dollars flexible to be used for any response to COVID-19, because we understand that the sector has gone through a lot of difficulties. As your colleague noted, some of them have closed. And so these particular challenges are based on the fact that some of them were operating on very thin margins. So they need help with PPE, they need help with cleaning supplies, they need help with ECs and other needs. So the funding that we're providing to Ontario is more flexible than ever before, precisely because we understand the nature of the need has evolved because of COVID-19. In terms of the affordable, accessible, quality spaces, that's something that is ongoing work between us and will continue. We have a long-term plan, $7.5 billion to create many thousands of affordable spaces for Canadian families. But make no mistake, the COVID-19 response includes early learning and childcare, and this agreement is in addition to that. The agreement extension reflects the reality of COVID-19 because we're making the funding flexible, but we haven't stopped, we haven't removed our foot from the pedal when it comes to the long-term investments, to the 250,000 space commitment for before and after school spaces. We have a lot of ambition in this sector, and Ontario is a great partner for our ambition because they're equally ambitious and responsive to this sector.
What's the overall message to parents of school coming up? I mean, just for yourself as minister, there's so much talk about this. What's, just the overall, it's go time, basically. I mean, what's the message here?
I will absolutely answer that question. If I may just respond to what was noted a bit earlier, just in the context of the province of Ontario's investment in childcare. Just for some data points I think are important. First off, the province on an annual basis is allocating about $2 billion in operating expenditure. That's a significant investment. That includes the childcare tax credit to up to 75% of eligible expenses for hundreds of thousands of working parents. That's a significant investment on the operating, on the capital, because we often hear, particularly in rural and urban settings as well, increasingly access is a challenge. So we put $1 billion in investment to ensure that 30,000 childcare spaces will be built. Last year alone, just for context, this is something that no government takes responsibility for. The market, nonprofits and independent operators do. But the fact is, in this province, 19,000 net new spaces were created as a consequence of good government actions at all levels to really encourage the private and nonprofit sectors to step up and create more access, and we are grateful for their participation. So I just want to reaffirm that we're going to continue to make those investments. We're working very closely with the municipalities in this respect, and just making sure that when a parent needs to go to work, that they have access to a reasonably affordable childcare space in their community. That's important. With respect to the students, indeed, it's it's go time. We are excited. Having gone through a school myself, seeing the professionalism, the thoughtfulness, the absolute work ethic, the 100% care and compassion of our frontline staff in our schools, our principals, administrators, and educators, I am feeling increasingly confident that we can get our kids back in class, knowing how important it is for their mental health, their development, and for their learning that they do so. So right now, on the eve of the back to school, my focus, I think our focus as a society must be twofold. One is to do everything humanly possible to continue to reduce transmission. What Dr. Williams and many other leading doctors have said in this country is that we need to make sure that the community spread remains low in order to enable kids to go to class. Those two have a huge relationship together. And if we do our part as a society, particularly those younger adults under 30, if we all do our part and continue to follow the protocols of distancing, hand hygiene, and masking, I do believe that we will continue to flatten the curve as a province and country, and more importantly, enable our kids to go to school, which is so important. And I think the second message is just one of solidarity, that we are all in this together. I mean, to be quite frank, if there's a time and a challenge in a nation where we have to sort of unite, put things aside, as we have done, I think, in the context of childcare, and to be fair, in the economy, in so many areas where at all levels, the intergovernmental levels, we have been cooperating in the interests of the public and our recovery, it is now. And my call to everyone involved in schools and education is to embrace that spirit, that if we work together and stick together, I know we'll overcome any challenge that will arise inevitably in the fall as we deal with influenza and the potential second wave. But I remain cautiously optimistic. I remain impressed and inspired by our students and by our frontline staff, and I'm just going to remain focused for the coming days to make sure those protocols are in place, that the response time is clear, that the testing capacity is very much accessible for students, likewise teachers and kids, and that those public health nurses continue to do the amazing training that they're doing province-wide in local health units in all parts of the province.
There's been some criticism towards the provincial government in terms of, mainly from educators and parents who say that it's still not enough money to maintain, I guess, to give the schools resources to have proper distancing. I know this is something you disagree with, so I was hoping to get your comment on that.
Yes, I think I heard just in the context of resources. Yeah.
A lot of, there's been some criticism from educators and parents. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so in the context of getting students back in class, obviously we have been listening, and systematically throughout the entire summer we've been scaling up and investing more and more and more to ensure that this province has some unique differentiators that are going to keep our kids safe, because that is the bottom line for the Premier, for and I think for all levels of government who have invested in the Safe Restart. Ontario is expending in around $900 million. Net new money to ensure that our kids are safe, to ensure that every protocol is in place, those layers of protection to keep students safe. So from just a total investment, we lead the nation, but it's not just about the dollars. It's also about the differentiating advantages students have in this province that they won't perhaps in others, respectfully. In Ontario, we are more than doubling the amount of public health nurses that have been hired that work with our schools. More than doubling. Currently 460 public health nurses. We are adding an additional 500, and thanks to the federal investment, an additional 125, meaning 625 public health nurses, doubling the complement that has existed well before our time in office to ensure that there's healthcare practitioners deployed to schools to keep the kids and staff safe. We have a robust asymptomatic surveillance testing regime to ensure that kids have access to testing when they need it. We have cleaning happening right across the province, an additional 1,300 custodians, and we're hiring more educators, more spacing to ensure that these classes can maximize spacing and really mitigate the risk. In every area we're leading, we've been listening to the Chief Medical Officer, to doctors, we've been consulting sick kids, we've been listening to all the best pediatric minds, because when it comes to our childcare sector, when it comes to our schools, when it comes to our kids, I think we have a shared ambition to make sure that they can learn and do so in a safe environment. And we're going to continue to demonstrate that investment. We've said we'll be there for the sector. The feds have another $300+ million coming in January. The province has money set aside to deal with any second wave or pandemic, influenza, things like that. We are going to continue to be there for our kids, and we're going to continue to invest. And I think the fact that Chief Medical Officer of Health has signed off and endorsed the protocol is very reassuring for many parents in the province.
Do you disagree with people who say that the current strategy and amount of funding is not sufficient to maintain distancing among students?
I'm so sorry, just say that one more time.
So would you disagree with claims that the current strategy and amount of funding is not sufficient to maintain distancing among students within schools?
We've allocated $900 million, of which we just announced $170 million that can be used to increase distancing, meaning either to rent spaces and or to hire more teachers. Either way, school boards are tapping into those monies, plus the provincial money, to do that. So, what I would assert is we've put the resources in place to ensure kids are safe, that distancing can be achieved, supported by those other layers of prevention like masking, like hand hygiene, and cleaning enhancements province-wide. And just before, just before, if you'd be so kind, I just want to turn it over to Christine Hogarth. I know we're in her riding, and I'm putting her on the spot, but it's an opportunity maybe just to speak about childcare and the announcement. Sorry, Christine, but I'm doing this to you. Okay.
Well,
Well, thank you, Minister, and I just want to thank both ministers, Minister Hussen, who's been here today to announce this funding. You know, as a stepmom, as a parent, you know, you're concerned about your children going back to school, and you know, our government and our province and our federal government, we want to make sure our children have the best education moving forward, and safety is paramount. And I understand when parents are a little concerned, but you know what? We will make sure that those kids are safe. And if anything goes wrong, our minister has assured us that we will deal with those issues right away. It is really important. I understand your concerns, and I just want to thank everybody, and I want to thank the federal government for being here. Thank you to my colleague James Maloney for inviting me to the podium, and thank you for everything you're doing today. So let's have a safe school. Everybody has to do their job. Their part is wearing masks. Their job is continue to social distance, as the minister has said. And if we do our part, our kids will be safe. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks very much, everybody.